This is Rummy's Corner. What is the most significant heavyweight championship bout in each decade? John L. Sullivan. The history books have been written, and Sullivan is regarded as the first heavyweight world champion. Therefore, when examining the 1890s, it might be tempting to pick the 1892 contest, when Sullivan lost the title after he was knocked out by Gentleman Jim Corbett in round 21. But as someone who has always been fascinated by the history of photography and film, in addition to boxing history, my choice for the most significant heavyweight title fight during the 1890s was a no-brainer. And there they are. Look at them. Bob Fitzsimmons, Gentleman Jim Corbett. Incredible to believe that this bout was filmed all the way back in March of 1897. It's extraordinary. The old footage is clear enough that you can see Bob's receding hairline. And you also might have noticed that trunk styles have changed a great deal in the last 124 years. Difficult to imagine a heavyweight champion today sporting trunks like those inside the squared circle. So the mere fact that we have footage that still exists from this bout makes it the clear standout for me. The first heavyweight championship fight on film, when Bob Fitzsimmons became the third heavyweight world champion after he scored a knockout against Gentleman Jim with a blow to the solar plexus in round 14. When we examine the 1900s, this is one of the easiest picks to make. In December of 1908, Jack Johnson became the first Black American heavyweight world champion when he defeated Tommy Burns in dominant fashion. The incredible thing about this was that it happened nearly 40 years before Jackie Robinson had broken the color barrier in Major League Baseball. In the context of racial integration in professional sports, the triumphant victory for Jack Johnson was profoundly ahead of its time. In that sense, Joe Gans was even further ahead of his time because he won the lightweight world championship more than 6 years before Johnson had won the heavyweight crown. But Jack Johnson was competing in the marquee weight class, and his legacy commanded a far bigger spotlight when he became heavyweight world champion. Easy pick this one, when Jack Johnson defeated Tommy Burns after 14 rounds when the fight was stopped by the police. It had been prearranged that if the police intervened, a points decision would be rendered, and referee Hugh McIntosh scored it for Johnson. Moving on to the 1910s, it might be worth perhaps considering Dempsey's destruction of Willard as a viable candidate here, but I believe the clear pick is the original fight of the century between Jack Johnson and former champion James J. Jeffries. The 4th of July in 1910. This bout was largely another product of the times, with the omnipresent racial undertones that surrounded Johnson's entire championship reign and the boxing world at large in those times. This event can be seen as the personification of all that entailed, and perhaps that is how it is best remembered. A case can be made that Jeffries had no business leaving his alfalfa farm after a 5-year retirement, but that is part of what makes this one significant. Jeffries retired as the undefeated heavyweight world champion, thus representing the first true break in the championship lineage. There were observers who never recognized the lineage established by Marvin Hart, which continued to Burns and ultimately to Johnson. And there were otherwise those who were looking to discredit Johnson regardless of the validity of that new lineage. So this is my pick, because when Johnson stopped Jeffries in round 15, he had solidified his valid claim to the heavyweight world championship beyond reproach. And in my opinion, this match set a precedent for future generations when newly crowned champions solidified their standings by facing the retired former champions who preceded them. In the 1920s, we had the famous long count in September 1927. Gene Tunney put his heavyweight crown on the line against the man he beat to become champion, the Manasseh Mauler, Jack Dempsey. This championship fight took place under new rules, which were not universal at that time. The new rule required a boxer to go to a neutral corner after scoring a knockdown. The moment that forever immortalized this contest happened in round 7, after the former champion floored the Fighting Marine. When referee Dave Barry instructed Dempsey into a neutral corner, Dempsey was stuck in the old rule mentality. When Dempsey finally went to the corner as instructed, Tunney had already had extra time to recover, and the controversy ensued. Further fueling the fire in the aftermath was the fact that US law at that time prohibited the transportation of boxing movies across state lines. Tunney survived the knockdown and went on to drop Dempsey in the following round, and he went on to win a 10-round unanimous decision. But the interesting thing about this one was not only the fact that it was contested under the new rules, but also that the transition of rules itself came under the big spotlight. So this is my pick because it represented a huge step forward towards the identity of modern boxing. The 1930s is another no-brainer. On June 22, 1938, Joe Louis defended his heavyweight world championship against the only man who had defeated him previously, former champion Max Schmeling. That fight happened 2 years earlier before Louis won the championship. This is another fight that had racial undertones, and it also had massive corresponding political undertones as well. The contest itself became a symbol of the opposing ideologies and the subsequent struggle between American democracy and Nazi Germany. On the eve of World War II, amidst the political implications irrevocably connected to this boxing match, cool as an assassin, Joe Louis made quick work of his former conqueror, dropping him 3 times before the fight was stopped just over 2 minutes into the opening round. The Brown Bomber secured his standing as an American hero 9 years before Jackie Robinson debuted for the Dodgers. This match is widely viewed as the most historically significant boxing match during the 20th century, and indeed perhaps even the most significant sporting event in all professional sports. The fact this fight largely symbolized the global conflict of the time is a bit unfair to Schmeling, who was not a member of the Nazi Party, despite being exploited by such under the tremendous global stage of this boxing match. In conclusion, it should probably be noted that Louis and Schmeling later developed a friendship outside the ring that endured until Louis died in 1981, where Schmeling was a pallbearer at his funeral. The 1940s is a trickier proposition. In fact, this is the trickiest decade to examine so far. Almost every heavyweight championship contest in the 40s involved the Brown Bomber. Unlike the previous decades, I do not feel there is any one title fight that stands head and shoulders above the rest. That said, I'm inclined to go with the rematch between Louis and Jersey Joe Walcott. That one happened in June 1948. Louis won a controversial 15-round split decision the previous December, and this matchup had a strong passing of the torch vibe. Jersey Joe dropped Louis in round 3, but the Brown Bomber survived and persevered. And in the process, he became the personification of the old boxing saying that every great fighter has one last great fight left. Trailing on 2 of 3 cards late in the fight, the Brown Bomber scored a dramatic 11th round knockout against Walcott. So this is my pick for the 1940s because it represents the last glimpse of brilliance from the longest reigning heavyweight champion during the long, rich history of professional boxing. The 1950s is a decade that has several viable candidates. For Jersey Joe Walcott, 5 times was a charm when he defeated Ezzard Charles to become heavyweight champion on his 5th opportunity to compete for the crown, and in winning the championship, he became the oldest boxer to become heavyweight champion at that time. Then you have the beginning of Marciano's championship reign, when he scored a dramatic come-from-behind knockout against the very same Jersey Joe. Marciano, of course, went on to become the only heavyweight champion in history to retire and remain retired with a perfect undefeated record. When Floyd Patterson defeated Archie Moore for the vacant heavyweight crown, Floyd became the youngest boxer in history to win the heavyweight championship. And that is certainly a notable feat worthy of consideration. It might also be worth considering Ingemar Johansson's first match against Floyd Patterson. Ingo had become the first Swedish heavyweight world champion and only the fifth heavyweight champion at that time born outside of the United States. But my pick would be the contest that took place on September 21st, 1955, when light heavyweight world champion Archie Moore, the old mongoose, challenged Marciano for the heavyweight crown. This was an incredible battle of attrition between two determined warriors. My reason for picking this one is because this was the last fight in Marciano's career. He would retire after this fight with a perfect 49-0 record. While I personally do not value perfect records with the same esteem that many fans do today, the fact remains that that record took on a life of its own. That unblemished 49-0 reached mythical proportions during subsequent years. This was Rocky's 49th and final victory that immortalized 49-0, and Rocky won the match when he stopped the old mongoose in round 9. The 1960s is an easy one for me, and it happened in June 1960 when Patterson had a rematch against the man he had lost the championship against, Ingemar Johansson. Patterson became the first boxer in history to regain the heavyweight crown. Personally, I think this is generally an underrated achievement that gets overlooked, especially when you consider how many former champions tried and failed before Floyd. Gentleman Jim was 0 for 2 in his efforts to regain the heavyweight crown. Bob Fitzsimmons couldn't do it either. Jeffries failed against Johnson. Dempsey failed against Tunney. Schmeling failed against Lewis. Lewis failed against Desert Charles. The Cincinnati Cobra was 0 for 3 when trying to reclaim the crown. And Jersey Joe Walcott failed against Marciano. For those of you keeping count, that is 11 failed tries spanning 60 years. The fact that Floyd Patterson was the first man to finally regain the heavyweight crown is historically significant, and he avenged a defeat after he was brutally battered, having been dropped 7 times in their first encounter. Making the rematch even more memorable is the fact that Patterson ended matters when he nailed Ingo with a picture-perfect left hook. The 1970s is another no-brainer, just like the 1900s and the 1930s. In almost any other decade, the Thrilla in Manila might be an easy choice. And in any other decade, the Rumble in the Jungle might top the list. But the perfect storm scenario in the March 1971 bout between Muhammad Ali and Smokin' Joe Frazier was simply captivating in ways that were and remain unprecedented. It was billed as the fight of the century, and the event actually lived up to and exceeded its lofty expectations in an absolute battle for the ages. You had 2 elite-level heavyweight prize fighters, both undefeated, both near the peak of their abilities, and each man had a valid claim to call himself the heavyweight champion of the world. No situation like this existed beforehand, and no situation like this has ever arisen again. Ali had his boxing license revoked because of his stance as a conscientious objector over the draft and the military conflict in Vietnam. But Ali had never lost his championship inside the squared circle. During his absence, Smokin' Joe emerged as the new champion. Because of these circumstances, this epic showdown for undisputed heavyweight supremacy had a lot of political undertones, with Ali acting as a central figure in the political landscape of that time. Ali was viewed as a hero by some, a traitor by others, and these conflicting perspectives acted as a subtext to the event itself. regardless of any political implications. This was uncharted territory in heavyweight championship history, and it was a captivating scenario on its own unique merit. The brilliant clash of contrasting styles produced one of the most exciting and memorable heavyweight championship encounters of all time. At the end of the compelling encounter, Smokin' Joe Frazier was awarded a 15-round unanimous decision to solidify his claim as the heavyweight champion of the world. The 1980s is another clear one for me, and it was a situation that had similarities with the first contest between Ali and Frazier. Iron Mike Tyson had unified all three major world titles of his day, the WBC, WBA, and IBF. But the lineal heavyweight world champion was Michael Spinks, the man who had defeated long-reigning champion Larry Holmes. Despite not holding a major title, Spinks remained the man who beat the man. While the circumstances were different, it was another situation where we had two undefeated heavyweights, each of whom had a valid claim to call himself the heavyweight champion of the world. This bout settled matters beyond any shadow of a doubt, and Tyson stopped Spinks in devastating fashion in the opening round, making Iron Mike Tyson the baddest man on the planet. The 1990s was easily the trickiest one of them all. There were a couple of valid contenders here. Lennox Lewis beating Evander Holyfield in their rematch earned him the distinction of undisputed heavyweight world champion, and this was significant because not only was it the first undisputed champion in over 7 years, but the reality is we have not had one since after 22 long years. You could also maybe make a case for the first instant classic between Evander Holyfield and Riddick Big Daddy Bowe when the two undefeated boxers engaged in a thriller of a fight. But there were two bouts I believe were clearly more significant, and I labored over making this decision. Big George Foreman beating Michael Moore to become the oldest boxer in history to win the heavyweight world championship was simply extraordinary. Big George scored an epic knockout for the ages, and he reclaimed the heavyweight crown he had lost more than 20 years earlier. Foreman was just 2 months shy of turning 46, and his record as the oldest boxer to win the heavyweight world championship stands to this day. But for my pick, just edging out Foreman's incredible feat, I have to go with Tokyo Douglas. It was a perfect storm scenario for Douglas, where his mental determination going into the contest against the man who is arguably the most feared in the rich history of boxing, his determination was the stuff of legends that night. Tyson was perceived as an invincible, unbeatable force, but the recent passing of his mother motivated Buster to new heights. Tokyo Douglas defeated Iron Mike Tyson by 10th round knockout to become the new, undisputed WBC, WBA, IBF heavyweight champion of the world. It was the biggest upset in the history of prize fighting. So for me, the ultimate underdog triumph just edges out old George Foreman. Moving on to the 2000s, you have some contenders here. Brockman knocking out Lewis in a big-time upset, Lewis regaining the crown in an immediate rematch with a brutal knockout of his own. Those might be worth considering. Then the big money match between Lewis and Iron Mike. I suppose that one deserves a spot in the discussion. Then maybe you can include Vladimir Klitschko's victory against Sultan Ibragimov in the first heavyweight unification bout involving two non-Americans. Or maybe even Vlad's win against Shigaev, which is viewed by many, if not most, as the moment when Vladimir established a new lineage following the retirement of Lennox Lewis. But for me, the most significant heavyweight title bout in this decade was the one simply known as TKO 6. It happened in June 2003, when Lennox defended the WBC belt against challenger Vitaly Klitschko. This was an anti-passing of the torch scenario, one that helped immortalize this bout. Lennox won the fight. Officially, he was down on all the cards at the time of the stoppage, but Lewis literally carved Vitaly up in this one. Prior to the start of round 7, the ringside physician determined that the damage suffered by Dr. Iron Fist was too severe, and Lewis won the fight by TKO 6. That would be the last professional match for the great Lennox Lewis, and despite losing, Vitali's brave efforts improved his reputation, and over the next couple of years he was viewed as the successor to Lennox. And finally we arrive at the most recent decade, the 2010s. There are no real big standouts here, and as such, I think the answer is from November 2015, when Tyson Fury defeated long-reigning champion Vladimir Klitschko in an upset. Fury neutralized the potent and methodical offense of Dr. Steelhammer, and this moment represented the end of the Klitschko era, where the two brothers had dominated the division, either collectively or individually during Vitali's first retirement. The Klitschko brothers dominated the heavyweight landscape for the better part of 11 years, where Vladimir was the dominant force during that stretch. Tyson Fury won by 12-round unanimous decision, ushering in a new era of heavyweight boxing. Just a quick note on the current decade, the 2020s, and circling back to where I began, John L. Sullivan. The history books have been written, and Sullivan is regarded as the first heavyweight world champion. And the history books have likewise now been written and closed on every heavyweight champion I discussed in this video, with the lone exception of the Gypsy King, Tyson Fury. It is far too early to determine the most significant heavyweight championship bout in this decade. We're living it now, and we need to see how things play out. Recently, we saw Alexander Usyk put forth a fine display of the sweet science when he defeated Anthony Joshua to win the unified IBF, WBA, WBO heavyweight titles. And more recently, Tyson Fury defeated Deontay Wilder in an instant classic that will almost certainly be remembered as the defining trilogy of this era. But the heavyweight title fight that will probably wind up being the most significant one in this decade will be if and when we finally have a new undisputed heavyweight world champion. Now that's a big if. Boxing politics has a way of preventing the biggest fights from happening when they matter most, if at all. But if we get a showdown for undisputed heavyweight supremacy, that would result in the first undisputed champion in more than 22 years. 22 long years. If that happened, that's the top contender for the 2020s, no doubt about it. And that's all I got. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed and have a wonderful night. This is Rummy's Corner.